It is so good to see Dr. Antonette Aragon here today. She is an amazing woman. I'm going to preface my introduction with that because she has used her voice in changing the status quo in many ways. Dr. Antonette Aragon she's an associate professor at Colorado State School of Education. She's a feminist, a race scholar in the RISE Center, which is the Race and Intersectional Studies for Educational Equity and Transformation PhD program. She has always been someone to focus on social justice, cultural responsiveness, and equitable opportunity, especially with Latinx students. And we know right now in our country and in Colorado, we are seeing the population growth of Latinx. What I appreciate and what I believe you're going to value in today with Dr. Aragon is her direct experience in the classroom, her intentional application of her work. She is a Latina, Mexicana, Chicana scholar activist, and she does her community work for equitability. She wants to see that change. She has had several publications, co-edited a book, has several articles. She's a former high school teacher, so she knows what it's about to be in the classroom. And she currently leads a program called Caminos, and I'm hoping she's going to talk a little bit about that today. She is a professional who changes the rhetoric into reality. We are pleased today to have Dr. Antonette Aragon join us. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. I really appreciate it. I first want to say welcome to everybody. This is such an honor to be here, to be part of this BIMSN scholar learning, teaching. I'm so glad that this is for teachers because as I was a teacher at Thompson Valley High School in Loveland, I really just sought and desired to learn more about these concepts that you're getting a chance to learn about today. And I find that there's a lot to learn, and it's constant learning. And so my work in this area is my actual learning of it on a daily basis. There's something that I can learn every single day as it relates to equity, social justice, as it relates to race, racism, feminism. This is work of my heart. I am going to talk a little bit about Caminos, and then we're gonna move into what I have planned for today. Caminos is a program. It's a pre-collegiate program at Fort Collins High School, and we believe there's real power in mirroring. So we have college students who we call fellows, femtors, and mentors. Femtors because they are utilizing, so anybody can be a femtor in the sense that they're utilizing feminist practices. So in other words, they are collaborating, they're utilizing their voice together, they're coming into ways of community, and there's an equal playing field in that femtoring model. Whereas the word mentoring can sometimes be very top down. So we still use the word mentoring. People like to use the word mentoring, but these fellows, the college students get a chance to be mirrors and role models for high school students in cultural Spanish literacy classrooms. And so the CSU students actually go into the classrooms and they get a chance to work with them. And we teach lessons particularly related around community cultural wealth. So we really teach and utilize curriculum that focuses on community cultural wealth. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at community cultural wealth, but Tara Yoso created that, and it's an opportunity for us to really look at the wealth that every student, particularly I work with Latinx students, so we really teach them wherever they go, whatever they do, they walk into their whole life, their whole fields of anything that they do in life with their cultural wealth. And so it has to do with their language, their aspirations, their resistance. So it's a model that's been working really well. We're hoping to have more and more of our Fort Collins High School students come to CSU, and we are seeing that they are graduating at higher levels. And it's a career readiness program as well. So I just give that to you because I give you that background information because as I am teaching classes similar to what you're learning in this full workshop this week, Caminos is a research project that allows for me to pull on what the students are learning and gaining and showing that directly into my classrooms. So this activity that we're going to play today, we're going to actually play a game today. And I like to utilize games in my teaching because I think that they become analogies. They become opportunities for students to really see things in a new light, in a new way. So I'm going to be utilizing the chat quite a bit today. And I will also utilize Jamboard as well as my Google Drive. So I have a Google Slides to go through as well. So let me start. I'm going to put a few things into the chat for you. The first thing I will place in there are the Google Slides. We're going to play this game. I did create this game. It is a simple game. I call it the game of life. And as you get into it, you're going to see that it's pretty simple. You're going to be into groups, and in your groups, you're going to get a chance to work together. And as you work together, you'll be going around this particular game board from 1 to 40. So our objectives for today, we're going to participate in this game. We're going to analyze how the game is an analogy for education, and we're going to discuss and define meritocracy, intersectionality, equity, and relate it to the game of life. That's what we're hoping to do today. So first I want to start. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I want to go back to our chat. I want you to just take a minute, and I want you to write down what you think meritocracy, intersectionality, and equity mean. I don't need the definitions from Webster's. I just want your definition. Go ahead and put that directly into the chat. Okay, I'm just going to read some of these as they've come in. You can keep writing. We have meritocracy, earning something through merit, a person's value based on their output, intersectionality, where several things intersect, meritocracy, a system wherein subjects must earn their privileges. Intersectionality is based on the number of things that set you back in society, race, gender, socioeconomic status. Power based on merit, worthiness, intersectionality, how things meet, equity, having the same opportunities or resources. Okay. How different identities are related to one another, earned power, reward for achievements, intersectionality, connections among identities, earned. Great, 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 great. Equity is making sure everyone has access to the same resources. Okay. All right, and support. Equity is about support that has the support they need to succeed, and giving each individual what they need to succeed. instead of giving everyone the same thing, providing different resources based on starting points to allow access. Okay, these are excellent definitions. Thank you. Now we're going to go into this game, and you're going to go into Jamboard, and I only have a very few rules because in the game of life, there are very little rules. So you're just going to have to play it to kind of know what's going on. So everyone's going to participate. There are going to be 6 teams. Everybody will get a turn rolling the dice. Now this is going to be really important. I'll put this in the chat, but this particular website is our calculator dice roller, and each of you have to have your own, because on Jamboard, I could have used a different screen utilization where you get a chance to have everybody be part, but I just didn't like it. So, and all that to say that this means that you'll be utilizing your rolling of the dice individually. And so this is, I'll put this into the chat and everybody will be able to roll on your own. All you do is click on it. It gives you your roll of the dice. Everybody's going to move the game piece around the game board. You're going to talk to one another in your team, but obviously we're kind of like in this group. So it would be helpful to kind of just, I may put you into your groups really quickly just so you can know who's in your group and you know who's going to go when. And then also, as you move your piece, I want you to think about being able to have like person A, person B, or C, since you may not know each other's names. Is that correct? Are you all knowing each other from the first day, or are you kind of a new group to each other? I mean, if you know each other's names, it makes it really easy. But if you don't, then the way to actually rotate having everybody participate equally and have one person move the game piece and then that same person rolls the dice. It's easiest if everybody decides I'm a 1, I'm a 2, a 3, or 4, or 5, etc. Or you can decide we're ABCs, or you can even have something different if you want to call yourselves that. Any questions before we begin the game of life? Okay. All right. So if I could have group 1, go ahead, whoever would like to be the first person to roll your dice. Tell us what your roll is. All right, okay. I'm gonna stop sharing so we can all just debrief this. So let's talk about this. What's going on? What's going on with this game? What does it represent? How is it an analogy for education?
Clearly some had greater advantage and disadvantage than other teams.
Initially, like those first few rolls, you didn't notice as much like the differences, and then as we kept going, those gaps kept getting larger and larger. So we just think about in our younger years, students, those gaps might not be as noticeable or as extreme, but as we like pile on, that gets worse.
Yeah, so the opportunity gaps really become widened for sure.
Okay, thanks. I was just going to say it's definitely not based on merit or any earned thing. I feel like that was the point you were trying to make when you were like, oh, you worked really hard for that. Like, way to work so hard. That all the advantages and disadvantages were not due to anything that we ourselves were actually like doing or contributing.
Correct. Yeah, definitely. That's definitely part of it. It seemed like everybody was starting at that same spot, but when you got off and I actually said, oh, you've made it, you worked so hard, that was just something, you know, a teacher was saying, right? If we're going to relate this to education. Marlon.
I noticed that there, this is probably intentional, but that there seemed to be a general lack of trust for the disadvantaged players. And it was probably merely because they were disadvantaged. So like the expectation that because someone generally does less well than others, that when they do well, it's probably cheating, or even when they're not doing that well, that it's probably cheating, which is pretty silly, just because I guess the other players have a lot more advantage to take out of cheating. Like the fastest group one could move was 9 spaces at a time, while the fastest group one could move was like 14 at a time. So it would take a lot longer for them to get there. But yeah, the distrust towards the disadvantaged groups was interesting to me.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I noticed that came up for me is like the game is very like linear. Like you can only go forward, you can't go back. And much like education, like this year that we were doing SAT testing, and it's like we're in the middle of a pandemic, the kids haven't been in school, and yet we still have to keep moving forward. And so there's that aspect of that. And then I noticed toward the end, when it was only a couple of teams left, I wanted to get off the board, and like there's obviously no prize, or like I don't even know what I would be winning, but like the mentality that I just quickly bought into the fact that we have to get there. That's the end goal. And I'm like jealous of the people that got there first, and I want to get there too. And sometimes we don't know why. And I think it's the same with our students sometimes, that we're pushing them, and nobody really knows where we're headed. And sometimes it may be okay to just, you know, be at a 10 for a little while instead of a 30 or whatever it might be. So
I guess it's just real quick a technicality, but you actually could go back. And so the only group that could go back would have been group 1. If they rolled a 1-1, they would have had to go back 1 space. While group 6, even if they rolled a 1-1, the slowest they could move is 4 spaces at a time. So they still had a really huge advantage, even if they lose among.
And that's a good point, because I was even saying, do we even honor the fact that that last group made it off the board? Because technically they had 3, but if, you know, do we count that they have to go back to? Does that mean that puts them at 40? Do you remember I asked that question? Are they really at 40, or are they completely off the board? And so still that distrust is happening. But yes, the going back, in terms of what Velia is saying and what Marlon's saying, that going back, there's a choice, you know, in education. What if you want to really learn, you know, kids learn, they want to pursue the arts, and they spend a little bit more time in classes of the arts. You know, for some within the education system, they might say, oh, they're spending too much time there, and you know, that's putting them back, when maybe in reality it's putting them forward because it's part of their interest.
And I was just going to go off of what other people were saying, as far as like, it seems always like everything in high school is preparing kids for college, and that's not everyone's end goal. And so, you know, like we do all the standardized testing and we like prepare them to go to college, but I know lots of students, like that's not the route they want to take. And so I feel like we could be pushing like other things as well, instead of just like getting them college ready.
Yeah, and in Caminos, I have had so many students who have taken the route of going to community college to help them figure out what they want to do. And it has been really invigorating for the high school students, because we had one student who wanted to get into nursing, and she did a whole, you know, a 2-year program. It wasn't a full nursing program, but it was where she could be in a technical lab. So she did that in community college, and then she ended up going and back to college after, because she had her associate's degree. Then she wanted to get more college, and then she got into Caminos. She was able to explain that whole route of having worked, made money, you know, and it was really empowering for the students to see there are so many different paths that, and, you know, of course, the word Caminos is all about these paths, these roads that you can take, that you can go in different directions. It doesn't have to always be just that one way. Yeah, So what were the 10s, 20s, and 30s? I was like, you get an award. This is so exciting. What do you think that represented? What does that represent in education?
It made me think of I remember like elementary and middle school, there'd be awards for things like perfect attendance or like not being tardy or things like that. But it's something that's totally out of the kids' control. Like if their parents are having trouble getting them to school on time, but then there'd be awards like set for that, and it'd be like kind of a public thing. So it wasn't like, I don't think it was trying to shame kids that were gone a lot, but it can have that effect, even though it's just something that's not controllable for them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example. So again, another empty award that just seems like we're doing something that makes sense for us to award something for kids, but it may not be something that can be applied to all students, especially because if we go back to definitions and understanding what are these larger factors? What are these larger factors? One of the things that I want us to think about is education is a system, but what are the other systems that create these inequities? How do these inequities get going within our society? Where these inequities really happen, and how do they get fostered so that the inequity even has a stronger stronghold within a child's life?
I just want you to relate this to the game. You may have seen it
definitely shows how the inequity started from the beginning of how this country was even started, how we began this country. Yeah. What else?
I also think it was interesting, like just thinking about all the like political topics that have been happening within the school system, especially lately, like as far as SROs being involved in schools and things like that. And I thought it was interesting that like having those 4 people being able to see each other and just being like, oh, hey, it felt like, everybody who's higher up in the administration, at least in our administration at PSD, like it's all a bunch of white people and just being like, oh, like we see it, you've told us, but like it's fine. We're just going to keep going with what we're doing, seeing the standardized testings. We're like, we acknowledge it, we see it, but we can't really do anything about it. So we're just going to keep going. And yeah.
Yeah, and I was part of a parent group to assist with trying to really show why we needed to get rid of SROs. And when you had board members who would say, I don't want to be on the wrong side of history, but then when they would actually cast their vote, they were showing, you know what, we're going to just stick with the status quo. It's been working. We'll make some tweaks, but we're going to stick with things as they are. So, and that is definitely part, it is a, there are some direct correlations about how there is the school to prison pipeline and how SROs can contribute to that. So meritocracy, the definitions you all gave and even the one that I provide in the inside of the slides, meritocracy is a system in which people's achievements are attributed solely to their own efforts, abilities, or merits. Meritocracy posits that starting points don't matter and that the son of a day laborer has as much a chance of making it as the son of Bill Gates, as long as they work hard. Canada and the United States are presented in dominant culture as meritocratic systems. So when we have these systems at work, and we live in a meritocratic system, you see a video and you play a game like this, the starting line is not the same for all people. We have different starting lines based on our intersectionalities, based on where we come from. I'm, as was stated in my introduction, I'm Latina Mexicana Chicana, and what that means is I went to a school at Montbello High School in Denver, and we had mostly Black and brown kids at our school. I really loved education, but it wasn't the same for my sister and brother. They got treated very differently. The way that they were treated as they were going through, if we're going to say they were going through the number line, they had a lot of teachers who didn't trust them. They had, my brother definitely started in a school where it was devastating. He had a teacher who decided to make him the precedent of what not to be in a classroom. And that today, we've had lots of conversations, and he and I have talked about how he's done a lot of work to undo that learning, because it was just devastating for him to go through and have a teacher who wouldn't acknowledge him for the brilliance that he brought into the classroom. And instead, he was made fun of, or even by the teacher. Teachers have such a magnificent role, and we have, we as teachers, we get the opportunity to do one of the greatest jobs that we could ever possibly have on this earth, and it is to influence kids. And when we hold their hearts in our hands, it's such a great, great responsibility. And understanding how kids come from so many different walks of lives. My intersectionality, as I look at how I grew up, my parents, you know, my dad was someone who worked in the fields all his life. And so being able to have sometimes food on the table was a stretch at times, because he really worked hard for all of us. But for as hard as he worked, the meritocratic system did not honor the number of hours that he actually put in. And so it's easy to think that we live in this meritocracy, and if kids would just work harder, and if they would just pull themselves up and just do a better job, they could graduate. But there are so many different factors, and we have to understand their identities and the intersectionality that they come from to really understand how can we be most effective with kids. This brings me to a last point that I think is really important to mention. I think you've probably seen these particular pictures of where they're talking about equality versus equity, and then you have the fence. And this particular website talks about how they were bothered by that, by why do we even need a fence? And then, so they're talking about how do we get to liberation and justice? And they had a contest, and there's this discussion about equality versus equity. And what I love about this is that you have equality, these are all equal resources for everybody, but when you have equity, you're really looking at the community resources that are necessary for the different communities and what they actually need. And so that equity becomes really important to find out what do students really need? What do communities really need? And when we look at the race, this unequal race that you just watched as a video, you can see there are so many different facets to a person's life besides the education system. You have the education system, you have the healthcare system, you have the housing system, and then you have jobs as well. And so you have all these different ways that equity needs to have more of a level playing field so that things can be more equitable for students. And
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, that's what I have for you today. Thank you all for letting me participate with you all. And I really appreciate all of your discussion and your interaction with this game.
Thank you so much, Antoinette. It's great having you here and seeing the game actually, because I've heard about it, but I had never seen it. So thank you. I appreciate you.
You're welcome.